Hi friends, welcome to Team Python series. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use CX Oracle Python module for Oracle database interfacing in Python. So if your Python code wants to communicate with an Oracle database like fetching rows, deleting rows, inserting rows, or etc., then you need CX Oracle Python module. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is install CX Oracle Python module, right? So how can you do that? It's really simple. You just type the command python -m pip install CX Oracle in your Python environment. So let's try to do that. I'm going to open a command prompt now. In my command prompt, I'm going to write python -m pip install CX Oracle. Alright, by running python -m pip install CX Oracle, we have successfully installed the CX Oracle Python module. One more thing that is required for your Python code to connect to Oracle database along with CX Oracle is Oracle Instant Client. I have made a video on how to install Oracle Instant Client in a Windows machine, and I will leave the link of that video in the description of this video. So you can check out that video if you don't know how to install Oracle Instant Client. Oracle Instant Client is already set up in my PC. So now I have the required components CX Oracle and Oracle Instant Client in my PC. So now I am ready to connect to a database. Alright, the next thing is connecting to an Oracle database using the connection and cursor objects. In order to demonstrate this example, I need to have a database, right? In my previous videos, I've already installed an Oracle Express Edition database, which is a free Oracle database in my laptop. If you don't know how to install Oracle Express Edition, which is a free Oracle database in your computer, I have made a video on it, and I will leave the link of that video in the description of this video. You can go check out that video to know how to install Oracle Express Edition in your computer. For now, my computer already has Oracle Express Edition installed in it. In order to connect to an Oracle database, you need to know the connection parameters, right? So let's try to know the connection parameters of the Oracle database which is running in my computer. For that, I'm going to open the command prompt, and inside the command prompt, I'm going to type listener control space status. Listener is lsnr control ctl space status. So using this command, you can get to know the Oracle service details running in your computer. So here execpdb1 is the pluggable database service name, and my pluggable database is running at port 1521. So these are the connection parameters which I need to know to connect to my Oracle database. Now before connecting to Oracle database with my Python code, I will also try to connect to Oracle database using SQL Developer manually first. So I'll open my SQL Developer now. If you don't know how to use Oracle SQL Developer, or if you don't know how to install Oracle SQL Developer in your Windows machine, I have made a video on it, and I will leave the link of that video in the description so that you can check it out if you don't know how to use Oracle SQL Developer. For now, I opened Oracle SQL Developer, and I'll try to create a connection to my local database in this SQL Developer. So here in this Oracle connections, I'll just right click and click new connection, and here I can write any connection name. For now, I'll write the connection name as local connection, and here I'll write the username. The username is system, and the password is the password which I have created while creating the database, and I want to save the password for future use. The host name is localhost because it's running in my own computer. The port name is 1521. We have seen it in the command prompt already. And the service name we got to type is execpdb1. That is a pluggable database service which I have seen in our command prompt. So let me try to test if the connection is working. So I'll click the test button, and you can see the status is success. So let me try to finish the connection using connect button. And now you can see I've got the local connection created in my Oracle SQL Developer. Now that we have connected our Oracle SQL Developer with the Oracle database, let's try to connect our Python code also with the Oracle database. So let's get started with coding. I'm going to take a blank folder, and I'm going to open it with VS Code. I'll create a new file. I'll just name it index.py. And in order to connect to the Oracle database, you need to have a connection and cursor object. So to create a connection and cursor object, you need the CX Oracle library. So let's try to import the CX Oracle Python library. Since we have already installed CX Oracle Python library, I can just write import CX Oracle, and then let's try to create the connection object. But before creating the connection object, you need to create the connection string. So the format of connection string is this one. So let's try to create a connection string in this format. So I'll create a new variable called connection string, and it's a string. And here first write the username. The username is system, and the password /password, and @ the database host address. Since my database is running in the local machine, I'll write localhost. And if your database is a remote database, you can write the IP address here, and colon the database port. My database is running at 1521, and / the service name. My database service name is execpdb1. So this is the connection string for my local database which is running in my computer. And now since I got the connection string, I can create the connection object. So let's try to create a connection object using a simple variable. I'll write a simple variable called connection equal to cx_oracle dot connect. Use the connect function and supply the connection string. And this way you can create a connection object to an Oracle database. And using this connection object, you can create a cursor object. So let me try to create a simple cursor object. Cursor equal to connection dot cursor. So what this does is it creates a cursor object out of this connection object. Why is a cursor object required? If you want to run SQL statements over your SQL database, you need a cursor object. That means if you want to do SQL select query, or if you want to do some SQL insert query, you need this cursor object. And then you do whatever you want, like fetch, insert, delete, etc. from the database. And at the end, you have to close your connection and cursor. So first let's close the cursor object, cursor.close. And then you close the connection object, which is connection.close. And that's it. This is the boilerplate code you have to write to connect to an Oracle database. So let's see if it's working. I'll just run this code, and here you can see my code is run without any errors. So let me try to create some errors by writing some arbitrary service name which is not present. I'll just write some service name like X. Obviously there is no service name called X in my Oracle database. So let me try to run this and see if I get any errors. And here you can see TNS listener does not currently know the service requested in this connection descriptor. So this is a simple code you need to connect to an Oracle database, and whatever the operations you want to do, you can do in this place. If you see the code in our blog post, the code to connect to database looks something like this. Additionally, we have just added try, except, and finally blocks so that we can handle the connection errors in case there is a problem in connecting to the database. But the concept is same. Create a connection object, cursor object, do your work, and finally close the connection and cursor objects. That's it. Now that we completed the example to connect to a database, let's try to insert some rows into database. The next example we're going to talk about is inserting some rows into a database table using CX Oracle. But to insert rows into a database table, you need to have a database table, right? So I have given an SQL to create the table used in this blog post. So just copy this SQL script and run in your Oracle environment so that you can create the table used in these examples. So let's copy this table script, and I'll open my SQL developer, and in my local connection, I'll run this SQL query. But one thing you have to notice here is I am creating the students table in this local connection which is logged in with the system user. That means the table will be created along with these default tables which I don't like. In my previous videos, I have already created a new user in this other user section where the username is test1. So I want to create this table in this test1 user. So in this SQL statement, I'm going to create a slight modification. I'm adding this test1 at the starting of this table name because the students table will now be created in this test1 schema, the test1 user. So I'll just run this query now, and here you can see table test1.students created. That means now if I refresh this table, the table will be created under the test1 user, not the system user. Alright, now I have successfully created the students table inside the test1 user. By the definition of this table, you can see ID is an auto-incrementing primary key. Student name is a string which is 250 characters limit, and date of birth is a timestamp, and student ID is a number, and student ID is unique, and the combination of student name and date of birth is unique. You can see there is no data in this students table. Let's try to use our Python code to insert some rows into this students table. So before writing the Python code to insert rows into database, let's try to create the SQL for doing the rows insertion into the database table. So I have opened my SQL developer to write the insert script and test it out here. So I'll write the insert script now. Insert into test1.students and write the columns which you want to insert. So I'll write st underscore name, the student name, date of birth, DOB, and the student ID. So these are the columns in which I want to insert the data, and values, you supply the values after these values, and here I want to write the student name as XYZ and the date of birth as 01/01/2021, that means 1st January 2021, and the student ID is 7654. But if you run this, you will get an error because this is a string, but date of birth is actually a date time. So I have to convert this string to the timestamp. So I'll just use the toDate function of Oracle. I'll write to_date, and here I'm going to mention the date as the first parameter, and the second parameter I have to mention the format of this date string. The format of this date string is dd-mm-yyyy. So this is the format of this date string. So now if I run this SQL query, I have to see a new row inserted into the students table. So let me run this SQL insert statement, and now you can see one row is inserted, and let me try to go to the students table and refresh this table to see if I got a new row inserted. You can see I got a new row inserted into the students table, and here you can see the ID is 18. I did not mention the ID in my SQL query. I have mentioned only student name, date of birth and student ID, but ID is auto incremented column. That's why it has been created by Oracle itself. Alright, now we have a working insert SQL so that we can run this in our Python code. So I'll just copy this SQL statement and go to my Python code. If you remember, this was the Python code to connect to the database, and here in this area we can do whatever we want. For now we will try to insert the table rows. So let me try to create the SQL text that we can run in this cursor. SQL text equal to the SQL which I have written just now. So this is the SQL, and here you can see I've got inverted commas in my SQL, so I have to use some escape characters. I'll just use my escape characters here. Now I've got my SQL ready, and once your SQL is ready, you have to run this in the cursor object. So I'll just use the function cursor.execute, and here we give the SQL text. So this way you can execute this SQL in this cursor object, and once your work is done, you have to definitely call this connection.commit, because if you don't call the connection.commit, your changes will not be returned to the database. Always remember, after your work is done, call the connection.commit to persist your changes to the database. Now this looks good, but giving the input parameters in the SQL statement is not good, because it may lead to SQL injection attacks if the inputs are coming from an external source like a web browser. You know, some attacker can write some select query or delete query instead of XYZ or whatever the name. So it is not safe to do like this. So what I will do is I will use SQL placeholders here. So I'll just remove these input parameters from here, and I'll write :1, :2 and :3. So these are the three placeholders where we will supply values to the SQL. So here in cursor.execute function, after SQL text, supply one more tuple where you will give the SQL placeholder values. So here you can see I have given the tuple with the SQL placeholder values. For the :1 I have supplied XYZ, for :2 I have given a datetime object which is 1st January 2021, and for the :3 placeholder I have given 7654 with the student ID. One more thing you can notice here is I have given the object values as per the column types. For example, :1 is corresponding to the student name column, which is a string, that's why I have given a string here, and DOB is a timestamp column, that's why I have given the datetime object here, and student ID is an integer column or a number column, that's why I have given 7654 number here. This way, using this parameter substitution, you can give the real data types instead of strings into your SQL statement, and this also saves you from SQL injection attacks. Alright, now our SQL is ready, so let's try to save this and run this. Alright, our program has executed, and as expected I have got an error called unique constraint violated, because I am inserting the same name, date of birth and student ID combination, and if you see the constraints of our table, the student ID is unique and the combination of name and date of birth is unique. In my case I am giving all the three same, so obviously the unique constraint is violated. So to make this code run successfully, I will open my SQL developer and I will just delete this data row again. I've selected the row and deleted it, and I'm committing this change to the database. Now this row is deleted, so there are no rows in this students table. So if I just run this code again, you can see the code is executed successfully, and if I refresh this table again, you can see I've got a new row ID 23 and my data is executed and inserted here. So if you want to test this again, you can just write XYZ ABCD and some other date of birth if you want, and some other student ID, because you have to change the student ID because the student ID is unique. So if I just run this code again, once again a new row should be inserted in this Oracle database. You can see a new row is inserted into this Oracle database table. So this is how you can use a simple SQL insert statement along with placeholders to insert rows into your Oracle database. Alright, it works good for one row. What if I want to insert some 100 rows? So how can I do that? So let's try to create an array of tuples just like this. So I'll just cut this tuple here, and I'll create a new variable, a list variable, where I'll write data tuples. This tuple will be a single item in this tuple, and let me try to create another tuple. This is another tuple. It is also another row just like this. So now in our case, I've got two rows to be inserted as data tuples, and now this is my SQL insert query, and here instead of execute, I'll write execute many, and here instead of giving a single tuple, I will give a list of tuples. And that's it. This SQL will run for each tuple inside this data tuples list. That means you can insert each row into this database table by using a single line called executemany without using for loop. You can also use for loop, but executemany is more convenient and performant. So let's try to run this again. And here obviously you will get a unique constraint because already there are rows in this table. So let me try to delete these rows. Delete selected rows. and commit these changes to the database. And let me try to run this code again, and the code has successfully run. And here, if you just refresh this table, you can see the two rows which you have inserted through our Python code are inserted into the Oracle database. So this way, using a single line of code, you can insert multiple data row tuples into the database table. So that's it about inserting rows into the database table. So now while inserting the rows into this database table, we've got an error called violation of uniqueness. Suppose if my application requirement is such that if I want to delete the old rows and insert the new rows in case of conflict, I can do that using the SQL delete query. So let me try to copy this again here. I'll write the SQL text. I'll take this SQL text, copy it here, and let me try to delete the rows. Delete from this table where the uniqueness constraint is matching. So the uniqueness constraint would be student ID equal to 1, or the name, the combination. So student underscore name equal to the second item and date of birth equal to the third item, and this will be an OR condition. So what we are trying to do here is we are finding the rows which are trying to conflict with our input rows and trying to delete them beforehand. So this is my conflict resolution strategy. You can apply your own conflict resolution strategy, but for now I am deleting the rows which are conflicting with the new rows. So this is my SQL, and I can execute this SQL using this cursor.executemany. Let me try to bring my data tuples above, because these tuples are required for finding the duplicate rows. And I'll write a comment here, delete the duplicate rows. But here the ordering is important. You can see student ID is not the first item here. I have written student ID is equal to 1. So this is wrong. I have tried student ID equal to :3 because it's the third item here, and the student name is the first item and date of birth is the second item. So the ordering of the tuple placeholders is really important. So I have corrected my SQL statement as per the ordering in the data tuples. So now I got delete from test1.students, where student ID is the third item of the tuple and student name is the first item, and date of birth is the second item. So basically, if any one of the condition like this combination or this student ID hits, it will be deleted. So I'm deleting the rows first which are conflicting, and then I'm inserting the rows. So let's try to run this again. I'll just save this and run this again. And here our one error, expected timestamp but got number. I think the ordering is also important, where student name equal to 1 and date of birth equal to 2 and student ID equal to 3. So let me try to save it and run this now. Now you can see our rows are inserted. So let me try to reload this again in the table, and here you can see the IDs are changed because the existing rows are deleted and the new rows are inserted. You can get the feedback about how many rows are deleted or inserted using the cursor.rowcount. It's really useful, guys. I'll just show you what the cursor.rowcount is. It will show you how many rows are affected after the cursor execution. So let me try to print that here. Print number of rows deleted equal to cursor.rowcount, and the same thing will be copied here. Number of rows inserted equal to cursor.rowcount. So what we are doing here is, after the cursor execution, CX Oracle stores the number of rows which are affected. In this case, number of rows which are deleted in the cursor.rowcount and the number of rows which are inserted in this cursor.rowcount. So let me try to save this and run this. And here you can see number of rows deleted was 2 and number of rows inserted was 2. So if I reload this, you can see new row numbers. So let's try to delete these rows and see what are the outputs. So I will delete these rows, commit to the database, and if I just run this again, you can see number of rows deleted equal to 0 because there are no conflicting rows, and the number of rows deleted were 0 and number of rows inserted were 2. So this way I have implemented my conflict resolution by deleting the duplicate rows beforehand. You can use your own conflict resolution, like you can delete the new row itself and only insert the non-conflicting rows beforehand. And here we got to know one more thing, that the order of this :1, :2, :3 placeholders are important. And that's it, guys. In this example, we came to know how to delete rows and how to insert rows in a database table, and this is a practical example of inserting rows into a database table along with conflict resolution. And always remember, after executing your cursor SQL, always commit the connection, otherwise your changes will not be persisted to the database. Till now we came to know how to delete a database row or insert a database row. Now let's try to make an example where we can update a database row. Suppose I want to rename a student with name XYZ to a name called DEF. How can I do that? First, let's try to clean up this. I'll just remove this insert statement and I'll modify this delete statement to be an update statement. So update the rows, and then I'll change the SQL the SQL will be update test1 dot students set student name equal to the first placeholder, where student name equal to the second placeholder. So this is the update statement which I am using now. Update test1 dot students set student name equal to 1, where student name equal to 2. So here I am going to give the data tuple. So the first placeholder will be the new name, set student name equal to def, where the existing name student name equal to xyz. So what I'm doing is update test1 dot student set student name equal to def, where student name equal to xyz. And since I'm giving only one tuple, I can't do cursor.executemany. I have to do just cursor.execute. If you want to run this update statement many times, you can provide a list of tuples and you can use executemany. But in my case, I'm just using a single tuple. So I want to run this statement one time. So I'm just using cursor.execute here. And the number of rows updated equal to cursor.rowcount. That means upon executing this statement, if there are any rows that are updated in the database, that will be reflected here. That means if any rows are updated, then you will get cursor.rowcount as 1. If no rows are updated, cursor.rowcount will be 0. So that's it. Just connection.cursor and you got the SQL, and I'm running this using cursor.execute, and then I'm committing it and closing the cursor and connection. Now you can see number of rows updated equal to 1. If I run this again, number of rows updated will be 0, because already we have updated the rows with name xyz with def. You can verify the same in our database also. You can see the student name is def instead of xyz, because I have ran this update statement to change the student name in the database rows. And that's it. We have completed updating the database rows. So till now we have completed how to insert a database row, delete database rows, and update database rows. And now the most important thing is fetching the rows from the database. So how can you do that? It is also the same thing. You just have to run the SQL, but after running the SQL, you have to run cursor.fetch_all to get all the rows into an object. So let's try to do that now. So fetching the database means running a select query. So I'll just write select the column names. You can also give star, but I prefer to write column names. So I'll write student name and then date of birth and then the student ID from test1.students. So I want ordering. I'll write order by student ID. In fact, I want to order by name first. So I'll just write student name, st underscore name, comma student ID. So my data will be ordered by the student name first, and if the student name is same, it will be ordered by the student ID. So this is the select query. Currently, I don't have any placeholders, so I can just directly execute cursor.execute. Once your cursor is executed, since this is a select statement, you don't need to commit your connection. So this is also not required. Just execute the connection and then you can fetch your data. So to fetch the data, just write records equal to cursor.fetch_all. So what this does, it will fetch all the data from the SQL select statement and store it to a list called records. So let's try to print the records and write print records, and let's try to save it and run this statement. And here you can see we have successfully fetched the data into a data object called records, and here you can see records is a list which contains a tuple, and each tuple contains the columns which you have requested in our query. Here you can see student name, date of birth, student ID, and here you can see string, date of birth and a number, because these are student name, date of birth and student ID. So this way you can get records as a list of tuples by executing a select statement on the Oracle database. Suppose if you want to apply filters like where clause on this SQL statement, this is a common scenario. Let's try to do that. Select student name, date of birth, student ID from test.students, where student name equal to xyz, order by student name and student ID. So let me try to save it and run this now. I did not get any rows because I don't have any rows with the data xyz. So I'll just write, instead of xyz, I will write ABC here and run this. And here you can see I got the row with student name as ABC, but supplying input parameters here is not advisable. It makes your code vulnerable to SQL injection. So just provide substitution variables. So I'll just write :1, and here in the execute statement I will give the placeholder value here like ABC, comma. So this is a tuple and it has one element which is ABC, and this is for the placeholder :1. So let me try to save it and run this again. You'll get the same result, but this time you are using parameter substitution to avoid SQL injection risk. So that's how you can fetch your records from the Oracle database table. using select statement and executing that select statement over a cursor. Suppose you want to use these records to create a data frame. This is a common scenario where people want to convert these results into a data frame so they can do further analysis on that. So let's try to cover the scenario, and let's create a data frame. I'll write df equal to pd.dataframe, and here you can see pd is not defined because I have to write it here. I'll write import pandas as pd. If you don't know what a pandas data frame is, I've created a video on that. You can check out that. I'll leave the link in the description of this video. And here you can initialize data frame by using pd.dataframe dot from records, and the first argument will be the records which are fetched from this SQL select statement. So I'll give the first arguments as records, and columns equal to the column names. So these are the column names which you mentioned in your query. So I'll just write them here. So let me try to print this data frame and see how it looks like. And now I'll run this script again. And here you can see we got a data frame created from the records which are fetched from the database. And now writing these columns hard-coded is not required. There's an attribute of a cursor object called description, and you can use this attribute to get to know what columns are returned in each row. So let's try to use that here. I'll write x for x in cursor.description, and the name of the column will be in the x of 0. So for each item in the list called cursor.description, there is a first item which contains the column name. Let's try to print the cursor.description also so that you can understand what's happening here. So let me try to run this, and here you can see this is the cursor.description. You're having all the metadata of each column returned in the records, but you want the column name which is the first item. That's why I've written x of 0 for x in cursor.description. So this is not required now. So this way you can dynamically know what columns are returned in your fetch query. So I'll run this again, and you can see your data frame is returned. So this is how you can very simply fetch data from your Oracle database using the select statement and run this cursor.fetch all. And you can even know what are the column names which are returned by using this cursor.description attribute. And that's it. We've even covered how to fetch data from an Oracle database. Alright, let's recap what we have learned in this video. We've learned how to install CX Oracle Python module, how to connect to a database using cursor and connection objects, how to insert rows into Oracle database using CX Oracle, how to fetch rows from the database, how to update rows of a database table, how to delete rows from a database table. You can see I have also given detailed source code along with explanation in my blog post for each topic. So please be sure to check out the link of this blog post in the description of this video, and you can copy paste this source code in your own projects and try it out for yourself so that you can practice and understand better. Practicing this source code once or twice is enough for you to understand and remember how to use CX Oracle, because at the end what we are doing is just creating a connection object, getting a cursor object, executing SQL, and then closing the connection. That's it. Hope you like this video, guys. Thank you for watching.